So in this part, let's look at the concept of blue buckets and green ruler when it is applied to dates. So the concept of discrete and continuous, which are jargons which are associated with dates here, introduces a certain level of complexity that perplexes most newbies to Tableau. In one sense, date is very easy in Tableau. You don't have to do any formulas. A lot of things are built for you. But then very quickly, people reach a place where they are introduced to a lot of these jargons which they don't understand: date value, date part, discrete, continuous, and they are completely confused. So my aim in this part is to demystify these terms and then tell you a way to relate to these terms and why even these terms are helpful. Yeah. So this is going to be a long topic, so I broke it down into two videos. So in part one, let's first understand the concept of trend and seasonality. Whenever we are doing anything with dates, typically if you are drawing a line chart with dates or doing any sort of analysis, you are interested either in understanding trend or seasonality. So let's understand these terms first, and then let's get into a quick scenario where we want to understand monthly trend and seasonality of two data sets. One is the employee master, my favorite data set that I hand created, and the second is the Tableau Superstore sample data set, which is a sales data set. Let's look at monthly trends and seasonalities of both of these data sets. Then in these charts, I have about 5-6 charts. I want to ask you, how is date behaving? Is it behaving like blue bucket or green ruler? Once you understand this, then the concept of why we even need this distinction of blue and green would become very clear to you. Then let's finish off with taking a behind the scenes look at this concept of discrete versus continuous. What if we don't have any of these concepts built in Tableau? What if Tableau behaves like any other BI tool? The favorite and the most used BI tool, in my opinion, in Excel is Excel. So if all we have is Excel, how would we implement whatever Tableau is trying to do? This is a great way to understand what's really making up all of these complexities. Once this is clear, once you are able to clearly see in Excel what's happening, then we come to Tableau, bring all these handcrafted items that we have created in Excel into Tableau and compare it to what Tableau is doing by default. Then we will understand where Tableau got it right, where Tableau made it more difficult for us, and then things would be much more intuitive to you. In part 2, I want to address a few more topics. Date hierarchy, this is one of the sweetest things about Tableau. But once we have understood all of these complexities and how things, then you will actually appreciate the sweetness of this, how this is done. And then drill down behavior, which is a part of the hierarchy itself. But this is something a lot of videos tell you as if it's a rule script that you have to understand. There's something so simple I just wanted to touch upon because it fits very well with our notion of blue buckets and green ruler. And then I talk about a favorite topic of mine, which is filtering of dates, where we can see the use case for both blue and green very nicely. Finally, one of the topics that many people find difficult is this concept of custom dates, because they are thrown these jargons: date value, date part, this and that. It's not complex, it's not difficult. I want to present you a way without dealing with any of these jargons: date part, date values. How can we make sense of this? And then how can we use this functionality for what it is built for? Finally, I want to leave you with a tip on how to drag your date. Yeah, so pun and fun intended. Let's start. So let's start with these two terms, trend and seasonality. So stop for a moment and ask, what does trend mean in your mind, right? So there could be a number of definitions that could be coming. For example, we say, oh, that is trending upwards in Google. There is a new trend, this is what is happening. So these are the things. And then seasonality, we talk about summer, winter season. Oh, this is our season time, so we are very busy. So these are the common usages, right? So let's get into dictionary definition and then understand this. But before this, I wanted to give you one keyword for each of these things. So when we are talking about trend, we are talking about direction. Which way are things going? Is it up or down? We are concerned with just direction, up or down. So here is a more comprehensive look. What I would request is you pause the video, read through all of these things, and then form a picture in your mind and then see whether my keyword actually confirms this. Yeah. So I'm going to proceed. So now let's get into seasonality. Here again, I want to give you one keyword, which is it repeating? Right? Seasonality is about repetition or periodicity. Here is a more comprehensive definition with nice examples. Again, I would request you to pause, read the examples as well as the definition, and then summarize in your mind one or two keywords. What does trend mean? What does seasonality mean? Because we are going to run through a number of charts, and then I want to ask you, does this chart help you to answer the trend question and the seasonality question? So it's important for you to understand and have a picture in your mind so that you can test your understanding. So now let's go. So here is the scenario that I wanted to do for you. So let's switch to Tableau here. Here is the employee master data set where I have a monthly joining trend. So the company has data from 2010 to 14, and we can see there are some months which are really peak. For example, if you look at this is March 2013. Generally, this is March seems to be a month of lot of recruitment, and if you see the bottom, there is May. Yeah. So now let me ask this: does this answer the trend question well? For example, is the employment trend going up year on year? Not very clear from this chart. Up or down, it's not very clear, right? So, and then is there seasonality? Are there some months where we do a lot more recruitment? Though we can guess at this, just looking at this peak, it still makes us move our mouse and stuff, and it's not making it easy for us to understand this. So this chart does not help us to answer both questions well. So now let's look at a variation of this where I took this and then broke it down into each year. So each year has its own compartment or own bucket. And now we can see some things a little more clearly. So if you look at this 2011 versus 12, we can see comparatively there is an upward tick in 2012, and which kind of continues in 2013 also, but things have kind of come back to 2011 levels again. Right, so this is a little bit more helpful in understanding the trend, though not super helpful. Maybe there is no trending here in this business, right? So there is no clear uptrend or the clear downtrend. There is some which is visible in this chart. What about seasonality? This, I think, understanding seasonality in this case is also not very easy. We can see, for example, focus our eyes on January, and then we can see things start low, and then very quickly, maybe in first quarter itself, things move up. So this is a little bit more helpful than this chart, but not super helpful. Instead of breaking things into different compartments, what if I just assign a color to each one of them? I think if you compare these two, you would agree adding color does not really help us to convey the message any better. I at least would prefer the version at the top than at the version at the bottom. Just wanted to show you these are two possibilities in Tableau. So now let's look at one more possibility where we remove year from the main and then put it on the side, which means it is going into color. And then now we can see January to December, each year has its own line. If I highlight, I can see. But then as an overall chart, this looks too crowded. Things are not very clear. But even with that, let's understand whether can it answer the question of trend better? Not really, right? So again, a general direction is not very clear. What about seasonality? When it comes to seasonality, this chart does help us. So we can see there this month there is this peak, and then there's one more peak somewhere around summer, which is July, September, and then things again seem to pick up during the December holidays. Yeah. So there seems to be this. And then final variation, I took off all the year, just plotting the overall all the employees across all the years summarized together into just one line. To me, this is the best chart to understand the question of seasonality, right? No crowding out, no unnecessary colors, just one line telling us clearly where things seems to be going up and down. So from a seasonality perspective, this chart is great. From a trend perspective, across the years, we cannot even see because there's no year in picture here, right? But within the months, yes, we can't really, so we can see some months are going up and down. So now let's put all of these things together and then ask which charts are better at answering the question of trend. If you see all the four, the bottom two, they are not really good at answering the trend question. In the top two I would point to the right one with the year as acting as its own compartment as buckets, right? This is good. From a seasonality perspective, hands down, this bottom chart is the winner, right? Though if you want to then get into details from here, drilling down into this is better than starting here with all this confusion, colors and stuff, and then helping us to really form a picture here, right? So that's with respect to this data set. If you see the data set itself, it does not clearly have an upward movement or a downward movement which is clear. Now let's look at the sales, which is superstore data. This is the monthly sales trend. Does it answer the trend question? Yes, there seems to be a general upward direction in sales here. Seasonality, this chart does not really help us to understand. Now if we break it down, this helps us to see there is a clear upward movement, as we can see by these nice lines. Here things start here, but here there is a jump up. One box is up here, things jump up even more here, even more, right? So and then end up here, this high is way higher than any of these highs. The highs of these years are higher than the previous years. Yeah, so there is a general upward movement that we can see here. So this chart is better. And then if you go to the next one, not really very useful. Here all the things combined together, so we could see seasonality. There is a lot of seasonality in sales as expected during the year ending, which is November December holiday season, and then one more in March here, right? And then this one makes it super clear. So comparing all these things together, from a seasonality perspective, this chart is the winner. If you want further details, we can use this to drill down. From a trend perspective, this chart is the winner. If you want an overall, this is the kind of chart we are used to seeing from a stock market perspective, from a long-term perspective. But for many times, having these compartments are actually very helpful. So now, having seen these scenarios, now let's go and understand each of these charts. How is date behaving? Is it behaving like a bucket, blue bucket, or is it behaving like a ruler? So how does date behave here? So first question to ask yourself is, what is plotted here from a date perspective? We are plotting month here. And then month is not even mentioned by Tableau. It is just mentioning years. So what is it behaving like? Blue buckets or green ruler? Just a quick recap. From a green ruler perspective, as we know, if we know the starting and ending points, we know every value because the tick mark tells us there is consistent intervals. Just looking at the two axes, we can very clearly see this is a green ruler. With respect to bucket, we need to know each of these buckets because they are distinct and discrete, right? So that from this perspective, month of the date is behaving like a green ruler, very clear. So now let's go to this chart. So what is date doing here? So as you could see here, there is month of order date and there is also year at the top. There are two things that are here. So now let's ask this question, how is year behaving here, right? So if you see year is really taking this charts and breaking it into parts, into its own compartments, into its own buckets. So year is behaving like a bucket and they are listed individually. Each value is listed, telling us one more clue, this is behaving like a bucket. If you see the bottom where month is listed, we see January, May and September. So a few values are listed, telling us the clue that if we know the starting and ending point, we can predict which is behaving like a green ruler, right? So here is one chart where we are using date, the year is behaving like a bucket, where the month is behaving like a green ruler, right? So both behaviors are there. So this should convince you the need for this complexity in Tableau to have these two different aspects. If we don't have this, then all we get is this previous chart, right? Which is not helpful, for a trend or a seasonality perspective, whereas this chart is helpful, right? So now you can appreciate why. So now let's go to this one, this chart. How is year behaving? Year is not even in the, visible, but it is visible through colors. So if you look at the color palette, different colors, it is telling us this means this is discrete, behaving like a bucket, right? And then the month inside is behaving like a green ruler. Yeah. Here let's look at here the year is still on color, so it's behaving like a blue bucket. What about the month? So if you see, there is January to December listed in sequence, so it should tell you probably this is green ruler. But if you look closely, every single value is listed, giving you a further clue. Knowing one is not enough to know about another. So Tableau is in some sense telling you I am treating it like a bucket. So that's why I'm listing every single value here, because knowing the first value will not help you to know the second value, right? In this case, we know because it's a calendar, but then the listing of each one of them is telling us this is behaving like a bucket here. So month is behaving like a bucket, year is also behaving like a bucket. And thus in this final chart, only month is visible and we can very clearly see all the months are listed, right? So again, pointing us to this is behaving like a bucket, not like a green ruler. So those are the 5 scenarios where we have seen this. Now let's go to Excel and understand if we have to handcraft it on our own, how would we do this? And then we will bring that handcrafted data set into Tableau and compare the behavior. So here is the starting point. I have a join date, just 10 records. Yeah, so from 2011 to 14. So now let's understand if we want to add, for example, year, month, and how would we do this? Here is what I have done. Here I've added year. As you can see, it's a simple formula. And then I added month also. In Excel, if I use this function called month, it is giving me a number. This is not what we want typically. So we want a name. There is a much more complicated formula. Here is not, this is not an Excel session. So just let's focus on the output. So here I am getting a month here. But then when we think of month as human beings, we don't think of January. For us is always connected to a year. January this year, January last year and stuff. We don't treat January like an independent string. Like for example, if I look at January and filter for all of January values, we would see January here could mean 2011 January or 2014 January. So human beings, we think of month always in the context of the year, in the context of the calendar. Whereas when we want to break it down and treat it like a string, like any other string, like Tom, like a bucket kind of a thing, then this kind of behavior is helpful. That's where, so when we want to treat it independent of the calendar context, so that there is no green ruler, we have January, February behaving like a string. That means we can move them around, we can sort them. They are not forming in a continuum, right? So that is the behavior that we want when we are using this separate things. All the years are put into just January as a bucket. Whereas here, January in one year is different from January another year as in a continuous calendar itself. Here I brought the data set into Tableau. As you can see, here is the employee master for dates. If you can see here, so the month and year which were numbers, they've come in the measures section. Understandable, because Tableau takes any number and puts them into month and the measures section. And then the month name and month year, because they had the string, they are classified as dimension. This is again confirming our previous rule. Date can behave both as a dimension or as a text, right? Sorry, as a dimension or as a measure. So if the month is just about a number, then it can behave like a measure. If the month is about a string, then it can behave like a dimension. So now let's start off this. I want to list all the years. So if I double click this, what will happen? Because it's a number, it's gonna get an aggregation in Tableau. This is not what we want really, right? So we never want to really aggregate by year, right? So let's move year here to the dimensions column and then double click here. So here now it is listing me individually, but what if I want to draw an axis in that case, right? So here is where really a very nice way to think about how something dimension then becomes a continuous thing. So if I right click here and change it to continuous, see what happens. So now the values are going from a continuous stream from 2010 to 15, and then the date, it is no longer listed in as a table as individual value, but it is forming an axis here, right? So this is really the distinction. Why date? So then we can plot something here. By default, Tableau is getting ready for a Gantt bar, right? But we can plot really anything. So this is the key distinction with respect to year behaving. So years is a dimension because we moved it. We don't want to use it ever as a measure, meaning we are not going to do calculations with year in terms of sum and all of that, right? So from that perspective, we moved it dimension. But even when in a dimension, if we want a table-like behavior listing individually, then we would treat it as a blue, which is, like a bucket behavior. If we want a continuous axis-like behavior, we are treating it as green, right? So now let's get rid of this. Let's look at month here. So I'm going to bring month over here. By default, it has put the aggregation sum, right? So we don't want it to be aggregated. So what choice we have? So we can treat it like a dimension. So I started off with something green, which is measure, and then look at, I am converting that green into a dimension. Look at what's happening. So it's still maintaining its color, it's maintaining its originality as a continuous thing, as a number, but it is treated like a dimension in this case, which is resulting in its own axis itself. So I did two things. With year I did a slightly different thing with month, so that you can compare how this is. In both cases, date is behaving like a continuous dimension. So when we say dimension, what we mean is we are not applying an aggregation. So when we say it is a dimension, we treat it like a bucket into which we throw these values, right? So if I throw, for example, the salary value here, right? So if I turn this around and then turn on the axis label, so in this month one, I threw whatever number of values that I found here, and then in this month 3 bucket I threw some other values, and then I'm applying the aggregation of some sum, right? So if I go back here, here when I'm listing this, I'm not aggregating. So if I want an axis, I put a green so that I get a green ruler behavior, but I'm not aggregating, hence it is a dimension. Yeah, so that's the distinction. So dimension is not aggregated, it's acting on its own. A measure is aggregated. If you are treating it without that, then it is behaving like a dimension. Yeah, so this is the case. Now let's clear this and then bring month name. So if in this case, January, March, May, Tableau actually nicely sorts this. Normally, if you go to Tableau, normally it does the sorting of alphabetically, like Jan, July and stuff. Tableau is actually very intelligent. It is doing the sorting manually, so on its own for the months naturally. Whereas the tools like Excel and other tools that I have used before, BI tools, I need to actually write a logic to sort them and treat them like a calendar itself, right? So this is now coming as a string itself, but there is no way I can convert this into a continuous thing, right? Because it is a string, so I cannot really say put this in an axis. It is not possible, right? So with the string that I handcrafted, I cannot display January, February and still treat it as continuous. The only way is to do it with the number 1, 2, 3, right? So then now let's get rid of this. Let's look at this month year, right? Here it is, here the things are getting kind of messed up. Now Tableau cannot really see this as a calendar thing. So it is listing January in alphabetical order. So things are getting, all kinds of mess up is happening because it's treating like a text, right? So now compare this to, for example, I click on this year and then here I'm going to click on this, ignore this part now. For example, I'm going to treat it as a month. Here month is listed, so if you see it here, it is treated like, in this case, like our text, right? So now if I want to change it to another type of month at the bottom, now this is treated like this month, but look at these beautiful labels. So we are able to actually get this kind of a month year behavior, but still have the continuous possibility. So that is where the real benefit of this is, right? So the simplest thing for you to remember is this top portion corresponds to this top portion here, this blue portion here. So which means this top portion is behaving like dimension. This bottom portion is behaving like a measure. So if you want a green ruler, all these greens here, use the bottom portion. If you want blue behavior, blue buckets, use the top portion. That's all. You don't need to deal with this date value, date part, no such complexity. Yeah. So with that, let's stop here, and then in part 2 I will move on to a few more topics related to dates.